And we have our esteemed colleague here, Verna Avery Brown.
Woo!
You know, I have to just slow down for a minute because I have to tell you, I told Tia a little bit, I cried throughout, filled with emotion, because you proved to all of us that journalism is about your heart and your values and your intellect all matching up and saying, I'm going to make sure that the things that people want to remain unseen for the benefit of a few become seen to all of us. And you talk some in the film about where this came from, your Jewish upbringing, and of course your family, your parents, your grandparents. We see you go back to Ukraine. But even with all that, what gives you the courage? And I know you say you don't have courage, but you really do. There's so many. Look at, we have what, over 220 journalists have been murdered in the last several years. So where did that well of courage come from for you? And where does it still come from? Because even now you're reporting on Palestine, for instance, you know, and how you just keep going, unrelenting, making sure that we hear the voices from the ground.
If only the issue itself would stop, we could stop. But first of all, I just want to say what a joy it is to be here at AFI Silver, to be here in Washington, D.C., to be here with Katea Stitt and Verna Avery Brown, the two stalwarts at WPFW, which was the first station of Democracy Now! Last night, Julie Drizzen was here. She was the founding producer of Democracy Now! We did the first show February 19th, 1996 in the studios of WPFW when it was on Champlain, which was amazing. And I got an apartment next door and lived in the mainly Salvadoran community of that apartment building, and we just walk over every day. I mean, I hardly lived there, but I mainly lived. And I say my first apartment in Washington was in WPFW. But also, I was born here in Silver Spring. I was born in Washington, D.C. My mother gave birth at George Washington Hospital, but
I'm a Sibley girl, so. And I grew up listening to PFW and Verna, Katea. PFW, it means so much. Thank you for being here.
It's so important. My dad worked at the NIH where I lived here. He was an ophthalmologist who studied sickle cell in the eye and also glaucoma. But I also am so honored to be here with Tia Lessin. Tia, who is the award-winning director of this film, Steal the Story Please, together with Carl Deal. They're Oscar-nominated for their film Trouble the Water about Hurricane Katrina. Tia just recently won 3 Emmys for her documentary called The Janes about the Underground Abortion Network in the 60s in Chicago. And they did such an amazing job as they combed through 30 years of Democracy Now! And I think your point, Katea, about courage is about the courage of the people we cover. That is the incredible inspiration. When I got the call, I was in Haiti to be the host of Democracy Now! I was at an underground house covering elections, and people would be gunned down when they went to the polls, when they announced their candidacy, but the overwhelming number of people in Haiti voted. And I was asked to do a daily election show, the only one in public broadcasting, for Pacifica. And I was thinking, wow, here, so many people in Haiti go to the polls at enormous risk. In the United States, most people don't vote at nothing like the risk. But I was very interested in what people were doing. I never thought it was apathy. I was interested in using the primary system to go state by state. How were people involved with their communities? And so after 1996 election, it was when President Clinton won again, there were more demands for the show after than there were before, because we were giving voice to the grassroots movements around the country. What were they doing? And people were interested in this approach of independent media that was begun at Pacifica Radio in the studios, Verna, where you were broadcasting as well.
Exactly. And I just want to say to our audience that when I told
Put the mic right in.
I thought it was on.
It's on.
Right up to your mouth.
Oh, okay.
Ever the.
That when I told Amy, you're sold out. You know, I went to the box office and you're sold out.
Verna came for the second time.
And she said, I'll never sell out. And the fact of the matter is she hasn't, and she never will. I've known Amy for 35-ish years, and this same tenacity and unrelenting perseverance and dedication and passion for justice that she shows now. We saw her chasing that guy at the climate center up the steps. She still has that 35 years later. But there was one clip, I didn't see it today, but with Clinton, President
Oh, it was there.
Clinton. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that conversation.
Did they ever ban you from the White House press?
Oh, yeah. No. Well, I even said to them, I think I'll probably be around here longer than you guys will. But that issue of, going to the press briefings, think about what's happening today. And think about this continuous thread through the film of the corporate media consolidation. When we were raising it 30 years ago, a number of journalists, really well-meaning journalists within the networks who went to the networks so they could have a broad base to challenge those in power, but found they were getting sidelined. But everyone, a number of people inside would say, okay, cool out on the corporate media criticism. And they're the ones who are now saying, you gotta say it louder and louder, because they are now the victims of that corporate slashing. Look at the Washington Post. They've cut a third, and maybe some Washington Post reporters or reporters who once worked for the Washington Post are here. But just in the last weeks, a third of the newsroom, hundreds of reporters. We had on a Washington Post reporter a few weeks ago who did an incredible analysis of the first day of airstrikes on Iran by U.S. and Israel, the U.S. Tomahawk missile that exploded that primary girls' school in southern Iran in Manab. 175 people at least died, about a dozen teachers, but overwhelmingly little girls. And she did this incredible expose. She wasn't working for the Washington Post anymore. A few days before, she had gotten the layoff notice. Think of the reporter in Ukraine on the front lines who got the message from the Washington Post, you don't work for us anymore. Think about what all this corporate consolidation means. And Tia and Carl have also been unrelenting on this. In fact, this film, they are not distributing through a corporate distributor, but by themselves, and are taking on the corporate media consolidation.
Well, we learned from the master to be unrelenting. The same media consolidation that is damaging journalism so much is also impacting the way films get made and distributed. It's narrowing the kinds of films that get financed and get released, and it's also continuing to narrow the kind of stories that get told. No Other Land, an Oscar-winning documentary about the West Bank, was never picked up by a U.S. distributor. You can't see it streaming in this country. The Oscar-winning documentary this year, Mr. Nobody Against Putin, was barely picked up by a very, very small indie distributor, Kino Lorber, about, I don't know, a month before the Oscars. It's hard to see these films, and there's a reason why. It's not because we're small, it's not because we don't try hard, it's because there's too few studios, and they're controlling too much media. And right now, the Warner Brothers Paramount merger is looming. And we came together, Carl Deal and myself, along with our executive producer Jane Fonda, Rosario Dawson, Julie Cohen. We came together to say, no, we cannot allow this merger to happen. We joined thousands of other filmmakers, both in Hollywood and independents, and workers in the media industry, in journalism. It is going to affect the work that we produce. It's going to create job loss. You know, we know that when companies merge, layoffs abound. And most of all, it's going to affect the audiences because you're going to see fewer and fewer films like this. I mean, there's already an abundance of films about true crime. If you want to see reality television, there's many channels, celebrity profiles, take your pick. But we have a superhero here, and we're trying to get this done. So we are doing this independently. We have formed a nonprofit that produced this film, that's distributing this film. We are already booked in 150 theaters across the country. So we are not only part of the Labor Film Festival this weekend, thank you, Chris, and the Labor Film Festival, but we are also, this is our opening weekend at AFI Silver Docs, along with, we're in Philadelphia, we're in Baltimore, we're continuing to play in Seattle and Portland and throughout the country. And this film will be in this theater at least through Thursday, and perhaps longer, as long as people show up. We don't have an ad budget. We don't have a 70-millimeter print. We have you guys as our secret weapon. We need your help spreading the word. So thank you for being our ambassadors. If you like this film, please let your folks, your friends and neighbors, your coworkers, your family know it's coming until Thursday, but if people show up, it could go beyond that.
You filling these seats does more than you getting to watch this film. You're allowing 100 people in another city, in another town, be able to see this film, because after every weekend, theaters from all over look to see how did it do, and they decide whether to open it in their town or city. In fact, the first weekend in New York at IFC,
it was the biggest opening weekend of our biggest art house theater in New York of any documentary in a decade.
Wow.
We're not trying to make money out of this. We're trying to make change, and we're trying to build community.
Thank you, Tia, and thank you both. I am a fangirl, I just have to say. But Tia, I wanted to ask you, I'm sure there was so much footage, like so much archival footage to choose from. How did you land? The story is so riveting, so engaging, so educational and emancipatory. How did you land on what to put in and what you just could not fit? I mean, it must have been a masterful edit.
It was hard. I mean, Amy entrusted her 30-year archive to us. This was recordings of her in the field, all over the world, all over the country. This was studio recordings, radio interviews, home videos, and then we got all this broadcast footage, from CNN, from C-SPAN, from the news media, to the degree that they were covering a little bit of the stories that she covered and recirculated her stories. So we had to make some very hard choices. And in the end, we really looked at this mantra, this ethos that Amy has, which is steal this story, please. And so we thought we really wanted to exemplify those stories that made it beyond, the independent news world, that were picked up largely by the mainstream media, because, Amy's motto is, we want this to go wide. We want this to go reach the biggest audience. And that is so
We call it trickle-up journalism.
It's antithetical to the way journalism practice. There's so much competition. People want scoops. Amy feels like a scoop is a failure. And so she wants it out there in the world. And so we just thought this was a really novel way of doing journalism. Not to mention, she doesn't do it with far fewer resources than many other organizations. She's doing far more, not government funded, not corporate funded, audience funded. And so there were so many stories we had to, save for another day, and those will come out. But
And the story with Aristide,
yes,
that was left out of it.
oh yes, that was left out when Amy accompanied Randall Robinson and Maxine Waters to the Central African Republic to interview and to bring back to the Western Hemisphere President Aristide.
I'll just tell that story quickly. And also I just want to say, as I look at Verna, one of my favorite pictures at Democracy Now! In the studios in New York is a picture of Verna and I interviewing Harry Belafonte before the U.S. invaded Iraq. It was in New York. It was freezing cold. It was like 0 degrees, which also showed what heroes the people were out in the streets in New York. I mean, I think there were 500,000 people, and he was addressing them.
I think Ruby Dee,
Or Ossie Davis, or
was also in there.
yeah. But on the question of Aristide, just to tell a funny hometown story, since Randall lived here before he went to the Caribbean with his wife Hazel Ross Robinson. So Aristide, the U.S. is involved with the coup against Aristide. They actually took him in a military jet, and he ends up in the Central African Republic, the democratically elected leader of Haiti. And Congressmember Maxine Waters, Randall Robinson, Jamaican parliamentarian, and others decided they would take a plane to the CAR, the Central African Republic, and try to bring him home. I was convinced that they chose CAR because there were such bad phone lines that when you heard Aristide on any other network trying to explain what had happened, he would say, you couldn't understand a word he was saying. He was under basically house arrest there instead of being the president in his own country. So Randall calls me and says, if you want to come on the plane to cover this journey. I only learned later that they had planned this trip, and it was very hastily put together. And his wife Hazel, and some of you might know her, very active in Congress, and said to him, who's going? And he laid out who the people were. And she said, are you kidding? This was during the Bush administration. It was Rumsfeld, Rice, Powell. And she said, are you kidding? A small plane of black people, they're going to blow you out of the sky. And so that's when he called me, apparently. So anyway, I didn't know any of this, so I said, yes, I would be there. I'd come the next day. Could I bring a camera person? They said, absolutely not. You wouldn't be able to hold the weight. So I stayed up all night learning how to use a camera because I would be my own camera person. And so then when he was leaving, his wife said to him, what did you do? You can't just have a small plane of black people. He said, don't worry. I called Amy Goodman. She said, Amy? You're going to have flown up faster. So anyway, I flew to Florida. I met with them. We went to the Central African Republic. They picked up the Aristides, and they were flying back to this hemisphere. And as they were hoping to deliver him to Haiti, I can't remember if it was Rumsfeld, Rice, or Powell, but they said, he is not to return to this hemisphere. And so I heard that on the plane. I went over to Randall Robinson, the great leader of Trans-Africa who helped to end U.S. support for apartheid South Africa, and said, well, what do you say to them, saying you can't come to this hemisphere? And he said, whose hemisphere? They would bring him back to this hemisphere, but could not land at Haiti, picked up their kids in Jamaica, and he would go to South Africa. for the next 7.5 years in exile, Aristide Wood. He got 2 PhDs, I believe, in South Africa. I then flew to South Africa with Danny Glover, and we got on another plane to follow the Aristides back to when they ultimately did return to Haiti, to thousands of people greeting them in the streets. One of the many stories, because there are so many. In fact, I want to just say one thing. The amazing people in this film, you know, Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, who started with Democracy Now!, went on to cover the Egyptian Revolution for us in Tahrir, and then worked with Madame Asser, an independent Egyptian newspaper, and there are very few. Came back here, worked with us, and now is at Drop Site News, which was co-founded by Jeremy Scahill, who started Democracy Now!, co-founded Intercept, then went over to Drop Site News. Juan Gonzalez the Great. They don't say that about so many people, but oh, how amazing. And Tia was just with him in Chicago as this film premiered. And also, Maria Carrion was with us in the time when President Clinton called up WBAI, and we did that interview with him. And I just got a text from Maria. She would go home to Spain. She lives in Madrid. And she became head of the FIS Sahara Film Festival. Another part of the film you don't see is the work in Western Sahara. But she's now head of FIS Sahara. They run a film festival in the Sahrawi refugee camps in Algeria. And she just texted me to say, can I say it? Was it announced, I think? What's that?
Not yet announced.
Oh, okay.
But you guys can keep the secret.
Okay.
Well, wait, you know what? I'm gonna have to say what Amy says to her guests all the time. We'll have to leave it there.
Okay.
Yes, we have to wrap up. Our leader here is giving us the word. Thank you all so much for, first of all, thank Tia, thank Amy, and Verna, and thank you all for supporting independent media in the nation's capital.
Thank you so much. SealTheStory.org. Find out showtimes and where we're playing across the country. Thank you, Amy Goodman.
Just one sec. As you stand there, we're going to do a group selfie. We're going to stand. We're going to, with all of you behind us. Okay. Oh, this is beautiful.
Democracy Now! Democracy, come on.
Oh, wait, come over here a little toward me. Yeah, just that's perfect. Okay. Ah, beautiful. Thank you.
Find a picture on our Instagram tomorrow, okay?